Hello, my name is Bob Warner, and welcome to the vlogcast for the Peace Pentagon Hub. Today I'm doing a Peace Pentagon Hub vlog in the justice and governance sector. And with me is Renaldo Pearson, who is definitely a thought leader in this sector. A few months back, Renaldo was named as the Co-Mission Director for Democracy Spring. And in this position, he is responsible, along with a team of other conscious leaders, for the direction and execution of all of the Democracy Spring efforts. Democracy Spring is a progressive social movement organization that uses campaigns of escalating nonviolent civil disobedience to build active public support to end the corruption of big money in politics and to protect the right to vote for every American. Renaldo is a gifted speaker, a writer, and a bridge builder. He's a graduate of Morehouse College, which is Dr. King's alma mater, and social engineer in residence at Harvard University, where he sits today, and where he was formerly the youngest college administrator. He is organizing his life's path has been deep rooted in the civil rights movement tradition and grew further in the struggle against mass incarceration. He'll also be featured in an upcoming Netflix movie, we want to hear more about that, called The Revolution Generation. So I was proud to be arrested on the US Capitol steps with Renaldo in April of 2016 as a part of the largest single day arrest on the Hill, and was really energized, Renaldo, by your speech in February down at Tulane University at the Unrig the System, where you talked about the 7 deadly sins of American democracy. So Renaldo, welcome to the Peace Pentagon blog. So Renaldo, tell us a little bit about...
Thanks so much, Bob.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying thank you so much, Bob. Your introduction was far too kind.
Thank you. Well, it's good to see you again. Look, we saw you in April at the Listen First Charlottesville event, and I've been looking forward to this day of being able to have a few minutes of your time. So, Renaldo, if you would, tell us briefly a little bit about your journey into what I call sacred activism.
Well, yeah, it's been quite the journey, following what Don Lewis calls the spirit of history. And he pretty much says, you know, what some call fate, others call destiny. You know when this force for good is after you. You have no choice but to surrender to whatever role history chooses for you. And it's not about ego, as he says. In fact, if the ego is involved, the entire process is interrupted. It's literally ultimately about surrendering, again, to whatever role history chooses for you. So, you know, I went to Morehouse College, the alma mater of Dr. King and Julian Bond, as you noted, among other luminaries. So naturally, I took a deep dive in civil rights movement history and ecology. And so that kind of already activated me through the DNA of movement building. And you couple that with my reading then, coming out of Morehouse, literally at the tail end of my tenure at Morehouse, reading Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. And I was just arrested, as I said, doing my Unrig the System speech, by, you know, how we as a nation could really create another system of racial caste out of the ashes of the last one. So the new Jim Crow, mass incarceration out of the ashes of Jim Crow, segregation and black codes. I immediately began to build coalition and organize around ending mass incarceration. In fact, I was the youngest member and spokesperson of the historic 200-member In Mass Incarceration Coalition, which they were all icons. I was just a young man learning. And we pushed the Obama administration to do all in its power to end mass incarceration. And we got some great successes, victories there, and things were moving in the right direction. But it became very clear to me, particularly after I saw Larry Lessig's TED Talk, that in order to unlock the door of sea change, which takes place in Congress, that's legislative change, just like the Civil Rights Movement had the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. In order to get that type of sea change, that legislative sea change, we needed to rein in on fixing our democracy, specifically campaign finance reform, where the Congress members were, and still are, spending the lion's share of their time, 37% of their time, fundraising for re-election, and kowtowing in the process to the smallest or tiniest slice of the 1%. So that's what brought me to Democracy Spring. And you spoke of this, historic April 2016 campaign where we organized the largest act of American civil disobedience this century at that point, with over 1,300 arrests. So that's what brought me to this point. And since the 2016 election, it has highlighted for me and underscored how broken our democracy is. And it's not just campaign finance reform, but it's what I call those 7 deadly sins of American democracy.
Wow. Well, it indeed has been a journey, and the country is blessed to have you and others that are working with you being a part of what is going to be a sea change. There's hope in all of this. From your perspective, what are the most significant issues that are facing our society today? How would you put that into a few paragraphs to say, if somebody's sitting on the couch and not paying attention and not voting because they don't think the system is even listening to them, what would you tell them are the biggest issues that face us today? And what are the best ways to face those challenges for every American?
Well, my answer really is that there are two sides to that same coin. You look at public polling, it's interesting to see the egalitarian agenda, as it were, polls quite highly. So whether it's climate change, gun control, whether it's economic inequality, living wage, and all the things that kind of rein in on economic inequality, whether it's universal health care, all these things poll really high, which makes this work that we're doing the top issue, because it is, and that is fixing democracy, right? Fixing democracy really is the issue of issues. It's that intersectional meeting point for all of these, causes, if you will. The way I like to describe it is the fixing democracy is the Goliath that David's army of egalitarians must focus its slingshot on in order to advance in earnest. Otherwise, we're going to continue to face diminishing returns on every other. So this is why it's so important that we unite, particularly now, where I would argue that our democracy is in a state of emergency. And this is not something that I've just come to conclude. This is something that is underscored by several reports. The Economist magazine's Democracy Index has ranked us lowest on the list of democracy than ever before. In fact, they've said that we're no longer a full democracy for the first time in our history, or in the history of that report. And that was just last year. Then you have Freedom House pretty much saying the same thing. And the Electoral Integrity report, I believe that's what it is, the Electoral Integrity Project. They've also underscored that same conclusion. And most recently, interestingly, there's a bipartisan effort with the George W. Bush Institute and the Joe Biden, the Biden Center at University of Pennsylvania, They've come together through Freedom House to do another report that was just released, I believe, last week, that underscores that same message. So how do we go about fixing democracy? I argue that we've got to look at what I call those 7 deadly sins of American democracy. And when we do that, will bring us to a point where every American feels like their voice is being heard, and the public trust in our institutions is restored. And that's the main factor that economists points out as to why we're no longer a full democracy. They say that there's been an erosion in trust of our public institutions. Well, let's look at those 7 deadly sins. Voter suppression, right? Where we've had 99 bills in over 30 states introduced to restrict voting rights. And this is despite the backdrop of us being having, I should say, internationally low voter turnout. So we should be making it easier to vote, not harder, given that fact. And then there's voter erasure or purging, where we have an issue of an estimated 1.1 million folks purged from the rolls, disproportionately Black and brown. This is unprecedented, right? And that alone has tipped the scales. But if you look at the purge list in Arizona, North Carolina, and Michigan alone, those were the 3 states with purge lists of in the hundreds of thousands, where Trump's margin of victory was in the tens of thousands. And that tipped the scales and gave him the 40 plus electoral votes needed to cruise past the victory line. So that's voter suppression, voter suppression or purging. Then you have felon disenfranchisement, where folks who've already served their time are barred from the right to vote for life. That's a huge stain on our democracy. And you got in Florida alone 1.5 million who have formerly already served their sentence and still are barred from the right to vote for life. And I think it's about 3.1 or so million nationwide. So then you have the corrupting influence of big money in politics. We've already talked about that. 30 to 70% of the time of our Congress members spent fundraising for re-election from the tiniest slice of the 1%, which is, literally kowtowing to the wealthy few at the expense of the many. Then you have gerrymandering, which is the cowardly practice of politicians redrawing legislative district lines in order to choose their voters. So we've got to rein in on that.
Regardless of which.
I
say regardless of.
That's right. You got both parties. Yeah. Absolutely, I agree 100%. You got 2 parties, both parties doing that. Absolutely. Now Republicans have used it to their advantage in this current Congress. The point that the Brennan Center for Justice has said that even if the Dems win this November for midterm election, the popular vote, they would have to win, in addition to the simple majority, 10 and a half more points of the national popular vote in order to win Congress back due to Republican gerrymandering in for the House. So yeah, then you have vulnerable voting systems and Trojan media, which is number 6. Both of which Russia has tampered with, and we're seeing even more evidence of that now. Right. But it's not just the Russian tampering on those 2 registers of vulnerable voting systems, right, and Trojan media that speaks to Facebook and elsewhere, where we've seen a torrent of propaganda and fake news, but also the spoiled ballots, quote unquote spoiled ballots, is an issue that we've seen in Michigan, for instance, where there have been over 70,000 votes or ballots that were spoiled and tossed. It's a ridiculous scheme that investigative journalist Greg Palast has also unveiled. He's the one who's behind the groundbreaking research of purging also in his documentary, which is for quite some time now, since last year, or 2016, I should say, been one of the best-selling documentaries on Amazon. It's called The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. I encourage all to see it.
Mhm.
And lastly, number 7 is the Electoral College, and how if we're to really confront fixing our democracy, this nation has to deal with the Electoral College, which is a vestige of our nation's original sin of slavery. Um, all one has to do is look up the 3/5 compromise to understand how uh, this is really outdated. And by the way, it goes against the constitutional principle of one person, one vote.
Yeah.
So those 7 deadly sins quickly again. Yeah, yeah. So those 7 deadly sins quickly again is voter suppression, voter erasure or purging, felon disenfranchisement, the corrupting influence of big money in politics, number 4. Number 5, gerrymandering. Number 6, vulnerable voting systems and Trojan media. And number 7, the Electoral College. Once we start making our way through that list, I think Americans will start to see, everyday Americans, how democracy starts to work more for them. The good news is that we can advance. In fact, that's our only hope right now, since we're seeing regression at the federal level. We can advance locally and at the state level, these pro-democracy countermeasures that redeem this nation of those 7 deadly sins. What does that look like? That looks like automatic voter registration. And we're seeing victories on that already. New Jersey just became the 13th state this year to advance automatic voter registration. And Massachusetts is on the verge right now, where I live, of being the 14th state. So you got automatic voter registration, you got same-day registration. That helps to combat purging and the purges that we've seen. Then you've got vote by mail, which is emerging as a great way to increase voter turnout, and it's also more secure, than the old systems that we have right now, the machines. You've got ranked choice voting, which is just emerged in Maine, first state to pass this, which helps to rein in on the Electoral College. It also renders viable third parties, which are not viable right now with the current system that we have that favors the 2-party system.
Right.
And it also increases turnout in government, among other things. And although Maine is the first state to legalize it, it's also advanced and working already in cities across the nation. And then you have other initiatives like independent redistricting commission in on gerrymandering, felon reenfranchisement, to obviously rein in on felon disenfranchisement. And there's an initiative right now in Florida to do just that. Small donor elections, public financing of elections, where you have a campaign finance reform. These things poll very highly already. Mm-hmm. And they've been proven to be effective. In New York, my good friend, in my mind at least, Letitia James, she went to Howard University, another like Morehouse. She spoke at the Unrigged the System Summit also. And she's New York's first African-American and African-American woman to be the city's public advocate. And she talked about it at Unrigged the System Summit, how that would not have been possible without public finance. So there's already legislation in Congress, the Government for the People Act, I believe it's called, by Congressman Sarbanes, that would match small dollar donations 6-to-1 to amplify the voice of the little man, right? So there's a whole slate of things, about 10 plus or minus pro-democracy countermeasures to those 7 deadly sins that can be advanced right now at the local and state level. So that's our hope. I see the more that we do that, the more you'll see public policy match public interest.
Right. Thank you. And thank you for all that. And thank you for sharing the 7 deadly sins with us as well. You've mostly answered my next question, which is about what are the strongest movements that are taking action. And there's so much it seems there's so much for everyone to do, because when many people look at Oh, democracy's broke. Oh, there's big money in business. Oh, they're all just bought and rented in the Congress, et cetera. Oh, the Supreme Court is just an extension of whatever political party's in charge. All of those things, they seem so massive to some people. Just like climate change. What am I supposed to do about the world? And the fact is that all of us have a role to play, whether it's in climate change, whether it's in democracy, creating representative democracy in this country. And so I appreciate you talking about those local and state things. And because there are a lot of organizations, Democracy Spring, represent us. Larry, you mentioned Lawrence Lessig's activities in his organization. I think it's called Equal Citizen, about one person, one vote, which is what the Constitution said is supposed to be happening, but it's not. Many of those organizations have local units that people can get involved in, or have a toolkit on their website, their national website, to create local units to take action, whether that's at a city or a state or a county level. And because all of these are building blocks, so there's something for, you know, the woman that's stuck at home with a bunch of kids and can't get out and do things in the street or visit or go to their state capital. The fact is there's things for her to do on social media, educating herself and taking advantage of the tools of Democracy Spring and other organizations and other movements that are part of that. I'd like to take only a short sidestep and ask you about your and Democracy Spring's involvement in the Poor People's Campaign, because I know you all have been connected with that. Reverend Barber and the other leaders that are leading that campaign had their 40 days to launch, not to conclude, but to launch the campaign. So if you'd share a little bit about that from your perspective, I'd appreciate
it. Yes, absolutely. Yes, Democracy Spring, we were national partners of the Poor People's Campaign. And it literally is the resurrection of a dream that was assassinated, essentially, along with its revolutionary dreamer, Dr. King, 50 years ago. And it's about putting on the national agenda, making it part of the national conversation of poverty in America, and how intersectional it is with the military economy, with racism, you know, and the other social evils, and how since 50 years ago, there are 60% more folks living in poverty. How now there is 1 in 2 Americans who are either, and that's 140 million to be exact, who are either in poverty or low income. And right now, the minimum wage, federal minimum wage, the report that was commissioned by the Poor People's Campaign has shown, is not enough for anyone to have a 2-bedroom unit or apartment at market rate in any city or state in the nation. So we've got to confront this, you know, as a nation, and there's not any shortage of solutions to this. There's just a shortage of political will. And this is where Democracy Spring comes in, because we see this as a democracy problem, right? You can't talk about poverty and this issue without talking about the franchise, without talking about voter suppression. That the Poor People's Campaign commissioned a report and a map that showed that in the same states that are the toughest on voter suppression, those are the same states that have the highest rates of poverty in the nation. That's not a coincidence, you know. So that is another proof point about when we democracy working for everyday Americans, when we get it to respond to the public interest, public policy will catch up. So yes, that was a great campaign. We helped them to break our record of the largest campaign of civil disobedience this century. although we still hold the record for single day, right, over the several days that we had it. It was a great campaign. In fact, on the second week of that campaign, Democracy Spring was a member of one of the organizations, one of the 25 organizations that formed the coalition that pushed Dems in both houses, or both chambers of Congress, both Pelosi and House Dems and Schumer and Senate Dems, to embrace and roll out what they're now calling a better deal, right? You know, they've been saying a better deal. So now they have a better deal for democracy. And this legislation includes, this omnibus package includes revitalizing the Voting Rights Act, implementing campaign finance reform, implementing independent redistricting commissions, gerrymandering, and also new ethics reform. Huge step in the right direction. Huge step in the right direction, and they're rolling this out in the middle of the Republicans campaign, as you know, weeks or months before this November.
Wonderful. Yeah. So folks should take a look at the Poor People Campaign. Also so it's called the New Deal for Democracy. So I'm sure there's information there that people can do research on as well and find their place in that work. A better deal for democracy.
Yeah, it's called a better deal.
Excellent.
That's right.
Well, what's next for Democracy Spring? What's the highest priority? What's the new next step for the movement?
Well, Bob, I'm glad you asked. There's some things, we're still working out the details of, but I can say this. I'm serious about making sure we're clear where we stand, particularly after what some are calling the Treason Summit in Helsinki.
Right.
This nation is under a state of emergency with regard to our democracy.
Yep.
And we need to be crystal clear about that. And since we're seeing the regression at the federal level, we've got to step up as patriots to save our democracy. If our federal government does not want to respond to the threat we're seeing on our democracy, foreign and domestic,
mm-hmm.
then we as patriots have to step up, put our bodies on the line, and get into what John Lewis calls good trouble. Mm-hmm. So I've already listed some of the countermeasures,
right,
to those 7 things, to the extent that we can mobilize to advance at the state level and model what we see out of Harrisburg, March on Harrisburg, which grew out of Democracy Spring. I was just with them to help them to do civil disobedience around reining in on gerrymandering and implementing new independent redistricting commissions. These are the types of things we've got to see across the nation. But there's also, some activity that we've got to see at the national level in terms of the Hail Mary chance that we have of stopping, say, a Supreme Court nominee, right? There is a long history of jurisprudence in this nation that says that you can't be your own judge in a case. So for a president who is the subject of criminal investigation to then be able to choose his own judge for a case that might make the Supreme Court, when this judge nominee is on record for saying president should be above indictment, strikes me as a conflict of interest. Wow. Let alone the fact that this president came to power illegitimately through voter erasure and purging that tipped the scales for his election. So look out for where Democracy Spring stands on these matters.
Good.
And by the way, we're in talks. Absolutely, I should thank you, and I should add that there are conversations that are being had now about how we reach an inflection point with broad-based coalitions. We've got to realize that the challenge we face right now is unprecedented. And if we're seeing unified regression at all three branches of the federal government, we've got to unify as movement builders to operate to the extent possible from the same page. Because us being divided and us having our attention diverted, it doesn't serve us in the end. It serves the other side.
Yep, keeps the status quo moving. Well, I have to ask you the last question. When are we going to see the Revolution Generation movie on Netflix?
Yeah, that's coming out in October this year.
October.
Right before the
Perfect timing, and we'll look forward to sharing that widely, as you might expect. So we'll need to wrap up today. And
thanks so much.
Renaldo, it's been really a joy and a pleasure to explore the justice and governance sector with you today. And we just really, really thank you for your personal commitment to representative democracy in this country. Your leadership is very much appreciated in this movement, in the Democracy Spring organization, as well as the shadow that it casts to many other organizations and those that are also desiring a representative democracy and looking for their way to take their part of this task. So for those that are interested, please go to democracyspring.org. You'll find information there about the organization, its mission, its purpose, its future activities, its past activities. And Renaldo, we just have to thank you very, very much and look forward to seeing you in the streets.
Absolutely, brother. Thanks so much. You know, we're always in solidarity.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.